when I set out to make this movie, I had been a kid that walked past that statue in college, not even aware of what it was. Like all statues, it was about dead soldiers and who cared. And then I read this monograph that was written by from the for the Joffrey Ballet. Doesn't matter. It was a monograph written about about what had happened, and to go back and look at that statue again is not just to see some guy on a horse and soldiers, but you see these individual faces. And what I discovered as I began to do this research is that this story was maybe the most famous story in the history of Boston up until the 1950s or 60s. And when the bus riots came in and there was such racial divide in the city, it sort of got shunted aside into the dustbin of history. There was even a school named after one of the survivors, who was the first African American actually to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. But the point is that to do something that's about historical redress, to put right a story that had been lost, gives it a much different context than just a studio movie. And I think that's the answer to your question of how I feel, the idea that it somehow has endured.
One of the questions that a student submitted was, and this applies to this movie and several other films that you've done, including The Last Samurai, is how do you balance historical accuracy with good storytelling?
Obviously, it's important. The reason it's important is that movies tend to be considered increasingly the permanent record as people read fewer books, as people presume to tell what can be taught in schools and what can't be. So, I do a lot of research, but this is, Gloria is one example, and I can talk about others. The facts of what happened, which is to say, how the regiment came to be, how they were forced to take less money, how they threatened to be shot, all those various things, those were all true. So were the early engagements, and so was the attack. So you had the bulwark, you had the shape of a story, but all that I knew of Shaw were some letters that I had that they found at the Houghton Rare Book Library at Harvard, and we knew nothing about the men who were actually those men in the tent. We knew where many of them came from. We could look at oral histories from men around that same time, but that was a fiction. So how within the context of truth can you also write fiction? And I think one way had to do, I think, and this was a conversation I had actually with Kwame Mfume, who was the head of the congressional caucus, the Black Caucus in D.C., and it was a long conversation, and he said the thing that was most important to him is that I didn't portray these men as if they were a monolith, that they came from all these different places, and that was confirmed by the men who came to be in the movie. When they heard that we were doing this movie, there were men from the military, there were teachers, doctors, lawyers, who all came because they wanted to represent. They felt that this was a story that they wanted to participate in telling. And that actually was a kind of meta, a kind of mirror of what we were trying to do as well. So in that case, one regard. When I started to say something like Blood Diamond, the script that I first was given, it was a first draft by another writer, and it talked about this American who was a mercenary who got involved with this Mende fisherman who was looking for his son. His son was taken. But it didn't go into the story of the child soldiers. It didn't talk about the experience of being a white man in South Africa or Rhodesia at the time, what that meant. And it didn't talk about really what the economics were of the diamond trade and how it pertained to the resource curse and the destruction of a country. So I did a lot of research, met a lot of people from diamond smugglers to soldiers to child soldiers who were rehabilitated, and I tried to get the facts right of what happened. But then within that, again, it was about trying to write a fiction because I'm serving two masters. I'm doing a movie for a film studio that's giving me a lot of money and they want their investment back. It's not a documentary, it's an entertainment. And how, in the context of entertainment, can I thread that needle? Can I do both? What I realized is to try to inhabit those different strains within those three people who are, I don't know if, wait, better to start. Who here has seen Blood Diamond? Okay, so you have a sense of what I'm talking about. There's a man who loses his son, who has to find his son. That's obvious. There's a man who hates this place that he is a part of but wants to get the diamond. And there's a journalist who wants to get the story. So all of these people have these different objectives, and yet it's about sort of putting them into this cauldron and spinning it around and telling a story that then allows you to learn with some greater ease and some it's not subversive, but it's indeed not making it a history lesson. It's not making it a task in the context of an adventure, in the context of this relationship between this man, the DiCaprio character, and Jaimin Hansu. You're learning about something, but you're also, I think, enjoying a narrative. So I would say that's been and The Last Samurai is somewhat similar, and The Siege is similar in a different way, but I think that was been a kind of set of coordinates for me.
Yeah. So you obviously so much more than your career is so to me
Long?
it's multifaceted. You're not just a director, you are also a writer, you are also a producer, you have created characters, you have written many scripts, you have written for television, you've written for film. And I want to impress upon young people and students how important reading and writing are to the craft.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about your education
Yeah.
in words and why it's so important to read and understand story and character?
Well, I mean, you are either part of a great tradition or you're not. And the tradition of American narrative film is probably equal to any other, whether that's Italy or France or England or Russia, any of the other places, because it's such a venerable tradition. And there are so many extraordinary artists who have been part of it. And, you could choose to ignore it, but do you dare? Who do you think you are? Not being willing to sort of see what came before. You can depart from it. Always. It's a good thing to depart from it, but to know what you're departing from. It's giving you a kind of foundation. And when I say that, I mean not just looking at old movies, but I'm actually talking about reading a lot of the things that many of these people have written about their lives. When I wrote this book, one reason I think I wrote it is I had been so heartened. It had given me such, not just joy, but comfort to see what some of the great idols had gone before and how familiar it was to things I was going through. To see that there was a set of inevitable rituals and rites of passage that are going to happen to anybody in their career. And it was just it was a huge comfort. So my point is, there's the tradition, the thing you're a part of. But then it's about the tradition of arts and letters. The best dramatist in the world, better than any of these guys I'm talking about, Homer, right? The best writing about war, the Iliad. Everything that's ever been written about jealousy and melodrama and love and romance and treachery and betrayal, it all comes from these sources. And it was an enormous leg up to have had a good education where I actually read that stuff. Shakespeare, obviously. It sounds like a cliche, but there's a reason that this shit is classic, right? It's because it has been forever new, and you can find in it the stuff that you will look. Shakespeare in Love that we made was because of a class that I had taken in college, and found a way to make a parallel between, William Shakespeare and a knockabout filmmaker who's getting his ass kicked trying to, make movies. So, I think that's the answer.
One of the things that I really appreciate about your book, and it's in the very title, is hits, flops, and other illusions, is that
The flops part.
is the flops part. Well, and I think it's important for people to know that they can and will fail at some things.
Failure rocks. You don't learn anything from success. Success is mystifying. Success makes you anxious. You don't want to question it, and you feel a little bit uneasy. How did that happen? But in the humiliation and the shame and the mortification of failure, you submit yourself to a process of self-scrutiny. You actually think about what it was that you were trying to do and why didn't it work and what can I do next. But even more than that, I think it actually helps you in any number of other ways in your life, but also as you go forward is to try to have a career, because what happens, you get knocked down and you get up because you have no choice and you've survived. And it means that the next time you go into work, you're not necessarily going to invest it with as much of that anxiety and fear and dread, because that makes you less of a good artist. What you realize is, okay, I'm here to do my work, and I'm gonna survive. It's gonna work out, and I can try to be present and not work any less hard, not work any less hours, but the quality of your life gets better because you are in these relationships that are important and that are real, and that is your life, and there are the people there that you're becoming close to. And I would describe it as passionate detachment. There's a certain zen in it. There's a certain ability to realize that your entire self-worth and validation isn't invested in the work. It doesn't mean that you work any less hard, but I think it lets you possibly relax and have a better life.
I'm going to ask you some of the questions that our students have submitted to you.
Okay.
One of the questions is, what would you tell young Ed Zwick that you wish you had known when you were starting out in this business?
Well, I think that's why I wrote the book. I wish he could have read this book 40 years ago, because it might have saved me a little bit of pain. But I did write it actually, as there are people who are going to buy this book because it talks about dishy Hollywood stories and movie stars and things that I've done that they might like or engage with. But I literally was thinking about myself or somebody your age reading this book. That was my agenda. What I would have said to myself would have been to be bolder sooner. After I got out of film school, I was 21 or 22. I was young. And I spent about 8 or 9 years being a mimic. I was a good mimic, so I got to work, and my work sucked. and I was just embarrassed, but I didn't know how to break out of it. And it took me a long time, and there were things in life that shook me. There was some tragedy, there was love, there was a lot of things that actually opened me up to the stuff that was inside me that I wanted to express, that was me. And sometimes it was as simple as honoring my own voice, trusting my voice, rather than to think that I was being like those movies that I had seen, or that thing that I had heard was good, or that somebody else wanted. And that was about becoming a man that owned myself, but that didn't happen right away. So my point is, if only I could have maybe had that start sooner.
Well, it sounds like you needed to live a little bit to figure out
That's
who
right.
you were and what it was you wanted to say.
You bet. And by the way, that's about being in the world. I mean, if you sit around and you just write movies about other movies, you're dead. It's not going to be interesting. And it is about having your heart broken, and it is about understanding some things about life, but it is about having also experiences that no one else has had on an Alaskan fishing boat, at Standing Rock, in the Black Lives Matter movement, in working with homelessness. It doesn't matter, but just being in the world rather than just being in front of your whatever it is now. I hope it's not your phone, but looking at movies.
When you were studying, when you were at film school, one of the questions a student asked is, how did you best utilize your time there? Was it gaining experience on set? Was it networking at events? Was it meeting with teachers? Was it just watching a lot of movies?
Well, I went to a place that I liked a lot. It was the American Film Institute, and it was run more like a conservatory. It was. They did not believe that they would teach you to then make film. They believed that you make film in order to learn about making film. So a lot of it was deep end at the pool. A lot of it was just getting out there and doing it and making horrible mistakes, and then looking at each other's work. I would say that my fellow students there did become for me a kind of nexus, a thing that was really important to me. Only two or three of them. You can't be close to all of them. But having found a very central relationship with Marshall Herskovitz, with whom I've written and produced things over the years, a guy named Peter John Bruga, who produced movies for me, Steve Rosenblum, the kid who edited my student film, has edited everything that I've done since then, in addition to being nominated for 3 Oscars. That is important. And I'll tell you the other reason for me. I really paid attention in film school. I really tried to learn, and I wrote notes, and I really tried to be present. And a lot of it didn't sink in right away. I didn't get it in certain ways, what they were trying to talk about in terms of staging, or what they were talking about in terms of writing structure and whatever. And it was only as I would make those mistakes later, or something would happen where I would say, oh, and the penny would drop, and I go, oh, that's what they were trying to tell me. And that's actually where my friend Marshall and I, where we were really important to each other, because we could remind each other, or we could be each other's scourge to say, that's not it. And he was there too, so he became a source of that for me, a source of a reminder of what they were trying to talk about in film school, because it's too much. Too much is coming at you now. You're not going to be able to retain all of it, and that's okay. But it's in there, because it can't not be in there, and it's going to come out. But the question is, how does it come out?
How important is it to have that person who acts as your gut check for whether or not something is working? And is it hard, even after doing it for so many years, to hear that it's not working?
I mean, I like to think that a couple of friends of mine take great pleasure in telling me that it's not working. But it becomes increasingly hard. It becomes increasingly hard because the more success you have, the more you are surrounded by, handlers and fluffers and agents and managers and all these people who are telling you that your shit doesn't stink. And so you lose a sense of perspective. You lose a sense of reality. And to have somebody that you can count on as a reality check is invaluable.
Another student question is, did you ever second guess your career, or were you always sure you wanted to be a filmmaker? And if you did second guess your career, what was the thing that made you sure you were dedicating your life to the right thing?
Well, I think when I was a theater kid in high school and even in college, and I couldn't thread a Bolex, and I didn't know how to work a Steenbeck or a flatbed, or let alone digital editing. I thought I was going to be in the theater, or I thought I was going to do this. I just didn't have a subject, and it took me 40 years to realize that I was the subject. But yeah, I mean, when I graduated college, my father had gone bankrupt, and I was a middle-class kid, and I wanted to think about how I was going to make my way in the world, and I got accepted to law school. And when I said no, my father and I didn't speak for 2 years. And I went off to Los Angeles, like everyone does eventually, to try to reinvent themselves. And I mooched off my girlfriend, and I read scripts, and I did all sorts of things to try to, make my way. And as I was doing that, a lot of friends of mine were already graduating law school and getting great jobs for white shoe law firms and clerking for judges and all this. And I questioned it. Of course I did. But I was following something that I just loved. I mean, when people come to me and they talk about, should I get in the film business, the best answer you can give them is no, don't do it. Because it's gonna break your heart, and it's gonna be unbelievably hard. And only if you have the grit and the stamina to persevere do you have a chance. Because a lot of people just won't make it, and people that I thought were really talented didn't make it. So it's not fair. And if you expect it to be fair, you should be, doing something else.
The problem is nothing is fair, so.
That's a very good point. I would agree with that.
I'm going to ask one last pre-submitted student question, and then we're going to open it up to the room.
Sure.
So get your questions ready. So the last question
Their
was,
questions are pretty good so far, I gotta say. They're okay.
a lot of them came from them. They're asking good questions. How do you feel about giving back to film students? And is it weird
Getting what?
giving back to film students? How do you feel about giving back to film students? And is it weird to be in a position of being looked up to by film students when
Well,
you were yourself?
that's a double question, and the first part is easy because I've done it. I've done a lot of this kind of thing and done artist in residence things and had interns. I've done a lot of that for the years, and that's actually not just about film. I just believe that somebody, if an older person does not honor a young person, then he is shaming them. That's part of our job in life, and people were that to me. I talk about certain people in this book who were mentors of a good kind. I had a very difficult relationship with my father, and I was looking for other fathers a long time, and there were false ones and there were true ones, and there were some people who really stepped in a very significant way for me. So that's easy. The part about looking up to is really weird because I'm in confusion half the time. I'm in anxiety.
Oh, so that never goes away.
No,
Okay,
I'm
great.
sorry, it doesn't. No, the dread and second guessing and envy and self-deprecation and despair. Make friends with them because they're going to be around.
Fantastic. Looking forward to that. Okay, if you have a question, raise your hand. Ask it. I'm going to repeat it in the microphone before he answers. In the back of the room.
An observation and a question.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Turner Classic just did a whole thing.
I'm sorry, louder.
Turner Classic just did a whole program, 5 parts, on why we remember movies
Ah,
by a professor at UCLA that's been doing it for about 50, 60 years, who you might know because a lot of producers, a lot of directors, a lot of actors have gone to him over the years. And he talks about why movies are rememberable. Like Citizen Kane. Why do you remember Citizen Kane? And, I got it. And The Godfather and Casablanca. That was the observation. The question is, what do you think of directors like Stanley Kramer and Orson Welles that take big gambles, big risks? And other directors like that.
well, I mean, if you get a chance to make a movie, the odds are you're probably not going to get a chance to make another one. And if you don't take advantage of that moment and the privilege of that and the opportunity, then you're just an asshole. I mean, really, why? I mean, why would you not take a risk? I mean, when people say to me, well, I'm just going to do this thing and it's, just sort of, I don't really care about it. It's like, get the fuck out of here. Who are you? I mean, you're defiling something that is sacred. This is a real art form, and it's an art form, unfortunately, that's dictated by money. And if somebody has somehow, and you contrive to get the opportunity to do a thing, it's got to be everything that you've always dreamed of doing. I mean, can you imagine? Let's aim low and then miss. So.
Okay. This gentleman right here. He's going to bring the microphone.
You had mentioned how important it is to stay true to your voice, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more, especially as students are here to discover and hone what their voice is. And in particular, as a writer, as a director, collaborating with other filmmakers, how do you know when you're staying true to your voice or making necessary compromises through the process?
I mean, obviously, there's no rule book. There's no way to really judge that. It's a really good question. I mean, I would say to you that the best filmmaking is personal filmmaking. And when I say personal filmmaking, I don't necessarily mean autobiographical filmmaking. I don't mean that it's necessarily even something that you know a lot about. It could be something that you've just become passionate about and devoted yourself to learn about, or someone else's story that somehow strikes you in a way as to become your story. The investment in it has got to come from inside, something in the relationships, something in the ambience, something in the period, whatever it is. And when it comes to talking about your voice, I think that there's a very it's kind of a woo-woo thing to talk about. In certain yoga, you talk about chakras, and what are chakras? And what are they that block the flow of energy to go from one place to the other? Well, there are chakras from your heart or from your head that somehow find their way to your fingers and to the keyboard. And how do you keep that path open? Or how do you open it up if it's blocked? Because there is a you that actually has thoughts about the world and what people are like. And there is a you that has secret, impure, ugly, horrible thoughts. And those are yours too. The best essay written about this was an essay is by Emerson. It's called The Essay on Self-Reliance. And it's hard to read because it's written in that period prose. But his point essentially is that the unbidden thought, that secret thought, the thing that you are afraid to express, is ironically the thing that when you express it, everyone else goes, oh, that's me. Because we're all that way. We're all secretly contorted and held in and whatever. And I don't mean it's just about expressing madness. It's just about the singularity of your experience is the thing that you're looking for and having to have confidence in.
In your film Glory, you have several battle scenes and fight scenes that are very intense and grand scale. Did you have any words of advice or things that you would tell the casting crew or maybe even yourself on the days of filming to kind of set the tone?
Sure. Well, I mean, I didn't have enough money. And, well, so what do you do? And I watched Ron about 15 times because Kurosawa, who's the genius of all time, and by the way, I would say to you, if there's no movie you ever look at again, that you should study The Seven Samurai, because what it teaches in terms of exposition and characterization and action is just wonderful. But he didn't have a lot of money. And what he did is that he figured out, first of all, I'll get these flags and put them on top of the horses and on men's backs so that there's all this stuff that would fill the screen from top to bottom and side to side and in depth. And he had certain days where he had a lot of extras, and he would use those days almost like as a, what's the word, like a template, where he could put one shot of all of these people in one scene, and then the rest of that sequence he would fill end to end and top to bottom, and in your mind you were still in that big universe that he had created. So I took a page out of that book for sure, because I had a couple of days where I had 700 men, real people, pre-CGI, right? No orcs. So one day we were on the beach and I had them all lined up in uniform, and we did, part of the prelude to the attack. And then another day we went into this huge field where we had the very big shot of that was Antietam in the beginning. And so I had 1 week with them, and I took those 5 opportunities each day to marble that through the story, which then was done with 100 men or sometimes 60 men. And so that was a technique of doing something like that. The world is different now too in terms of replication. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because you can actually use it as, say, they've used it in Game of Thrones to great effect. Some of that stuff that they did with combining real action and real scale with CG was really well done. And a lot of it sucks because they can do it, they do it. And you and the audience know right away that it's horrible or that it takes you out of your reality principle. And so you're not really engaged anymore. You're just saying, oh, look at that cool CG shot.
Who else has a question? That gentleman right there is going to bring you the mic. Yeah.
Hi, I have a screenwriting question. So, what kind of story structures or techniques do you use when screenwriting your movies?
That's a big question.
Is there any that come to the top of your mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do believe in outlines, but I don't really believe in treatments. I mean, I find that outlines, and they can be outlines that are denser, but I find that when you write a treatment, you're sort of lying to yourself about what is going to happen, because the minute you try to start to write a scene, you discover that you've accomplished 3 things that you thought was going to take 4 beats, or you write one scene and you realize you've only accomplished 1/8 of what you want to accomplish, and that's really 6 beats. And so I think that having an understanding of the armature, which is to say the classical unities of rising action and conclusion and denouement and all that, that's obviously important to have. But it's also just as important to defeat it. A lot of times it's understanding what the audience's expectations are and then defying them, because that's delightful. On the other hand, Glory is a very interesting example in that, yes, it's history, and yes, it's about these relationships, but it's also a kind of a genre movie that's like some crummy World War II movie about this plucky band of men who come together. One's from Brooklyn and one's from the South, and they hate each other. And then they go and they have to take that hill, and they become heroes. But that's genre. And that's actually understanding the role of genre sometimes in a story. I mean, we could probably sit down and I could point a movie that you think is a movie that's a very original movie. What's that? Oh God, the movie that I love, the Charlie Kaufman movie with Jim Carrey and Eternal Sunshine. It's a totally kooky, out there movie with repetitions, deeply classical, and owes all sorts of homage to old romantic comedies. So it depends all the time, but I guess that doing all the homework, doing all the preparation of what you think a screenplay is going to be, knowing what those bright lights are, what those essential beats are in the story that you've got to hit, those are going to be there. But giving yourself the freedom to just discover, actually, as you're writing, as you're going to get there, because you don't necessarily have to preordain it. I think it's a problem now when I look at streaming, that things are all shaped to reach this conclusion that makes you anxious to gorge and then do another one. That takes away my experience from experiencing a story as it might be told, because it's all designed. To me, that feels like a commercial decision rather than an artistic decision.
Do we have other questions in the room? He's going to bring you the microphone. 1 second.
How you doing, sir? What advice do you have as a director working with actors? Especially Morgan Freeman, Denzel, all that talent. From a director's standpoint, what's your advice with dealing with actors, working with actors on set?
Well, first of all, this book is, I would say, probably at least a third about that. It's a very complex relationship. It's also very simple. It's a lot about trust. It's a lot about establishing a real relationship. And that doesn't mean an intimate one necessarily, but it means a kind of honest one. It's also about understanding what an actor needs, because they're all different. One might think that every person that you will ever make love to in your life has wanted to be made love to in the same way. And if you assume that, you're going to be wrong. And so you presumably you're gonna listen and be trying to be reactive and present to what is needed, and whether that means being an authority figure, whether it means being seductive, whether it means being withholding, whether it means being a jester, it doesn't matter. You're going to be what they need if you're going to get that, because all you need is to get that result on screen in focus once. And what does it take to do that? But you have to be supple. I think initially in my career, this is probably before Glory and a lot of the TV and some of the things I'd done, I was overly determinative. I did not realize the gift that actors could give me. I was trying to get something that I had imagined. When I went into that rehearsal room with Andre and Jimmy and Denzel and Morgan, what they knew about the thing that I had written was far more than I knew. And the smartest thing I ever did was get the hell out of its way and let something happen. And I was furiously scribbling and taking notes and things, and then going back and writing that, formalizing it. It wasn't improvisational, but it was created as much by them as by me.
Any other questions? Let's do this gentleman in the front row, and then we'll go to the young lady in the back.
Hi,
Hi.
my name's Ahir, and you talked about how you worked with Steve Rosenboom, who also edited this film, and how you brought him from film school all the way here and brought him with other projects. And I wanted to know what things stuck out to you from your peers in film school and also from other projects that you worked on that you kept bringing them along.
Well, he's a good example because he's a reader. When he cut my student film, he basically had lied and said that he knew about editing. In fact, he had synced up some stuff at an industrial film place in New Jersey. But I didn't know any better, and we started to figure it out together. What came clear very quickly is that he was a strong personality, and he had his ideas. And what eventually evolved was that my way of shooting the film was talking to him, and his way of cutting it the first time was answering it, and it was dialogical in this way. In other words, it wasn't like I want to shoot all the film and have everything there and make a stupid ass assembly where I'm going to have to make every single decision. That's not interesting. He always would defer to my decisions about things, but he wanted to show me what was possible that I might not have thought of in the film. And if I didn't, and believe me, we've had conversations once famously when I asked him if he was smoking crack, but that's been unbelievably important. And I can now describe that in terms of a whole other aspect, which is to say the DPs that I've worked with. Because when I worked with John Toll and made 3 movies with him, I learned an unbelievable amount. Of course, he got too famous to care and was never available. And when I worked with Roger Deakins, he influenced me very deeply about the movie that I was doing, and that absolutely became about a willingness on my part to be influenced by him. And when I worked with Eduardo Serra, another genius, it was an entirely different aspect than when I worked with Bradford Young. And that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to expand your vision and your universe because you already have your own ideas. And it became very clear to me early on that the Dolly Grip had shot 50 more movies than I would ever shoot. And I would stand out there and I'd say, okay, now we're going to put the camera And I looked over there, and he was like over there, and I went, huh, I think we might go over here. And, you know, and there's so many gifted professionals out there to help you that you can learn from. And you don't do it at your peril. And that includes, you always make the movie with somebody. There's always one person there. It could be the lead actor, it could be the DP. In one of my movies, it was the costumer who was so smart about things, and we'd go out to dinner together. These people are, each of them in their right is a magnificent artist. It could be the special effects guy. It could be the prop master. You come very quickly to realize that that's the best part of making movies, is how surrounded you are by gifted, funny, irreverent, hearty people. That's the best.
I think we had a question in the back.
I'm curious, when you are in the director role.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sure. When you're in the director role, how do you go about navigating creative differences between you and a producer?
What are you going to do? What do you want to do in Hollywood?
Direct.
Yeah, well, you have to learn to talk louder.
Okay. Again, so when you're in the director role, how do you go about navigating creative differences between you and a producer?
I think there are different kinds of producers. There are those that are controlling the money, and there are those who are allied to the studio, and they're not always the same person. You obviously want a producer who is there to make your movie and not to make his next job with the studio. That's a person you're going to fight with, and it's a person you're not going to work with again. So it's got to be a producer who's willing to put himself on the line with you to make the movie. I think that to get into a situation where you are working with a producer who has a different idea about the movie that you're making, you've made a mistake, and I think you have to understand what those agendas are before you start. Because a producer's got to be your most precious ally. It's got to be the person who will lay down his career with the studio for you and explain to the studio why you need the things you need, and explain to the other people of the crew why they have to trust your vision. That person, this question shouldn't exist. I think this question sometimes exists in film school, or sometimes out in a small independent movie, because people are territorial, and they have ego, and it just shouldn't be that way.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Zwick? This gentleman right over here on the other side of the room.
Mr. Zwick, what is one kind of big flaw or mistake you see all too many filmmakers in the start of their career make?
Well, yeah, a lot of people try to do too much with what they have, rather than doing something well with the means that they have. Better to do a small thing or a version of something really well than that your whole movie reveals how diminished your resources were. Because you can't put a little legend on the bottom of the screen. This scene would have been better if we had more money. So I would say that's a really important thing to gauge your ambition and your appetite according to the resources that you have. And that includes how good the sound is, or how good the music is, or really to be honest and about, you can do great things with small resources. You just don't try to do a battle scene, that's important. And by the way, Orson Welles made that huge mistake when he tried to make, his Henry V. He did it with too little resources, and this greatest filmmaker of all time made a crummy movie. The other thing I would say, and this is more about directors, that everybody wants one more take. you didn't get it all. The actor wants one more take, the focus puller, and that's fine. But there is no such thing as one more take. One more take means, oh, he missed his focus on that one, and oh, the light changed, and somebody missed a mark. So that becomes another take, and then the reset of the props. And it's all fine, but every time you go too far in searching for something, you're shorting something that you wanted to do at the end of the day. And you've got to understand the use of very unsophisticated things like coverage or cutaways to save your ass at times, to be able to put together things that can hide the seams of the mistakes that were in those other takes, so you can move on and do the things you really want to do. Obviously, I'm not talking about things that were done in one. When you're doing a scene that's in one take, it's got to be right. But understand it's going to take more time to do that, even though it may save you time at the end because you haven't had to do the reverses and the coverage. What I'm talking about is time management. That a director has to know how long it takes to pull a wall. A director has to know how long it takes to lay down that dolly track, or how long it is to make a reverse. That a director really has got to understand production management if you really want to be able to serve yourself in terms of as an artist.
We have time for one more question. Do we have one more question in the room? Right here.
So, what would you say is your advice on working with other screenwriters? Like whether you're a co-writer working with another writer or you're directing another writer's work. I guess what is it over, like what's it like working with?
I mean, it obviously depends about the personalities, but I've been very blessed. I've had a partner in writing for many years. I've written things alone, but I've also worked with, my God, Stephen Knight and John Logan and Tom Stoppard and Bill Whitliff and Charles Randolph, great writers. And it's a privilege because you have all of your own ideas and you have their ideas, and then you have the third thing that happens, which is the combustion of all of those things. The most professional writers are the ones that are actually flexible and supple. The ones who are really professional are not going to fight you. They're going to want to serve your vision if you're the director working with them, or if you're collaborating with them. They know that creativity is infinite. They're not going to die on the hill of one line of dialogue. It just is not how it's going to happen if that person is truly good. And if they even began to be that person at the beginning of their career, they're going to quickly learn that they have to be more supple.
Mr. Zwick, thank you so much for coming here today, sharing your book, sharing your wisdom, and sharing your movie with us ultimately. We really appreciate you being here. Mr. Zwick is going to sign books for you. We have books at the front, or right outside of the theater. We have a table set up. We have books for all of you. And he's going to sign them for you before he goes to his next engagement.
They've actually already been signed.
Oh, they've already been signed.
So,
Never
there you
mind. Just
go.
go get your books.
Pre-signed.
Let's hear it
Thank
for
you.
Mr. Zwick.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.